Report 1. It was a cold winter night. I was driving down a deserted road after visiting my parents, who lived in a small town in the countryside. The journey was long, and to be honest, fatigue was starting to set in. Around 11 p.m., I pulled over to the shoulder to stretch my legs. The road was flanked by dense trees on both sides, and the sky was extremely clear. When I looked up, I noticed something that made me freeze. There was a light. It wasn't a plane or a star. It moved erratically, changing direction and speed in an impossible way. I stood there, hypnotized, trying to understand what I was seeing. Suddenly, the light stopped in midair and descended slowly until it disappeared behind the trees, somewhere within the forest. My heart raced. Against all instincts, I felt an uncontrollable urge to follow it. I grabbed my flashlight and, without thinking too much, ventured into the forest. The path was narrow, with branches scraping my shoulders at every step. The only thing lighting my way was the weak beam of my flashlight. The silence inside was almost oppressive. No birds, no crickets, just the muffled sound of dried leaves under my feet. As I moved forward, I began to notice a faint glow in the distance. It wasn't the white light I'd seen before, but something warmer, like a flame or an old lamp. My heart pounded so hard I could hear it. When I got closer, I saw something that made my stomach churn. It was a house, small, made of old wood, as if it had been abandoned for years. But the light was coming from inside. I stood still for a moment, trying to find the courage to continue. That's when I noticed something even worse. The trees around were burned, not as if they had caught fire, but as if something had cascaded down, leaving them dark and twisted. I approached the house, keeping my flashlight pointed at the door. It was slightly ajar. My mind screamed for me to turn back, but my legs kept moving forward. Inside, the smell was strange, metallic and burnt. There were broken furniture and dust covering everything, as if no one had entered there for years. But in the center of the room, there was something that made my body freeze. A table covered with instruments I had never seen before. They looked curious but wrong, twisted, as if made for hands that were not human. Then I heard a sound. A light click, like metal striking metal. I turned quickly and saw something. It was tall, thin, and covered with gray skin. Its eyes were large, black, and shone like glass. It stood in the corner of the room, watching me. For a moment I was frozen, unable to breathe. Then it moved. It didn't walk, it glided as if barely touching the ground. I screamed, stumbled over the table, and ran out of the house. I ran through the forest as if my life depended on it. And maybe it did. I could hear footsteps behind me, light but fast. The flashlight trembled, casting strange shadows around me. When I finally saw the glow of my car's lights, I felt a momentary collapse. I jumped inside, locked the doors, and started the engine. But before I drove away, I looked in the rearview mirror. It was there, standing at the edge of the forest, watching me. It didn't move, didn't try to come closer. It just stayed there, as if it knew I would come back. I drove non-stop until I got home. I spent the night locked in my room, unable to sleep. But the worst part was the next day. When I woke up, I found marks on the hood of my car. Deep marks, like claws, but too symmetrical to have been made by an animal. Since then, I have had the feeling that I am being watched. Sometimes I wake up in the middle of the night with the impression that there are lights outside my window. I have never returned to the forest, but even so, I know that what I saw that night hasn't been left behind, because deep down, I feel that what I encountered is still waiting for me. And maybe next time, I won't be able to escape. Report 2. I was never someone who believed in extraterrestrials. I always thought they were stories made up to sell books and movies. But that night, while driving home on a deserted road, something happened, something I can't explain. And that still makes me question everything I thought I knew about the world. It was around 10 p.m. when I finally finished my shift. I worked in a small town in the countryside, and my house was about 40 minutes away. The road I took was surrounded by fields and a dense forest with no streetlights. Only the car's headlights cut through the darkness. The night was cold and silent. The car radio was not picking up a signal in the area, so all I could hear was the sound of the engine and the tires on the asphalt. I had made that trip a few times, but that night, everything felt different. As I rounded a bend, I saw a light on the horizon. At first I thought it was a plane, but I quickly realized I was wrong. The light moved too quickly, changing direction abruptly. I watched for a while, trying to find a logical explanation. Then it stopped. It hung in the air, as if it were watching me, and before I could react, it shot toward me. I slammed on the brakes, and the car skidded to a halt on the shoulder. The light was now hovering over the road, illuminating everything around me as if it were daytime. It was so bright that I could barely keep my eyes open. My instinct told me to get out of there, but at the same time, something held me in place. There was a low, almost hypnotic hum that seemed to vibrate within my chest. I tried to restart the car, but it didn't respond. I looked outside and saw something that made me freeze. The light was descending slowly, and I could see its shape. It wasn't a conventional craft. It was large, metallic, but had organic curves, as if it had been shaped rather than built. It was at that moment that I noticed something moving at the edge of the road. A tall, slender shadow heading toward my car. My heart raced. I grabbed the flashlight from the passenger seat and pointed it at the shadow. The light revealed a humanoid figure, but something was wrong with it. Its arms were too long, the fingers clearly defined, and its head was large and disproportionate, with dark, deep-set eyes that reflected the light. I wanted to run, but I was trapped in the car. The creature moved slowly, as if it knew I had nowhere to go. It stopped beside the hood and made me look, tilting its head as if curious. My mind screamed for me to do something, but all I could do was grip the steering wheel tightly, praying for it to end. Then, suddenly, the light in the sky flickered, and the creature transformed. It took 2 steps back and disappeared into the darkness of the forest. In that instant, the humming stopped, and the car came back to life. I started the engine and got out of there as fast as I could without looking back. When I got home, I was still shaking. I locked the doors, turned off the lights, and sat in the living room, trying to process what had just happened. I spent the night awake, listening to every little sound coming from outside. The next day, when I went to my car, I saw strange marks on the hood. They looked like digital claw marks, as if something had touched the metal with hands that were not human. Since that night, I've avoided driving on that road. But sometimes, when I'm home alone, I feel that same low vibration in my chest. And on the quietest nights, I am sure I see lights in the sky. Lights that shouldn't be there. Lights that make me feel that what I encountered on the road is still watching me. And maybe next time it won't let me escape.